Not all pain screams. Some turn into silence, others into overwhelming strength. Some people have learned to look fine, just so they don't worry anyone. But behind the control, the coldness, the extreme independence, there's a story. Carl Jung warned us, when pain isn't understood, it hides and becomes behavior. And you know what's worse? Almost no one sees it. They just judge. In this video, you're going to understand the 13 hidden traits of those who've suffered too much, and why these people behave so differently, often even from themselves. And most importantly, how to turn this silent pain into awareness, into choice, into healing. So stay with me until the end, because this might change the way you see yourself, and the way you see the people you love. Some scars don't show on the body, but they're there, in the way someone looks, in how long it takes to trust, in the urge to disappear sometimes, even when surrounded by people. Some wounds leave no visible marks, but shape everything inside. Quietly, they change the way someone exists. Old pain doesn't announce itself. It becomes a way of being. It becomes silence where there should be words. It becomes stiffness where once there was openness. Sometimes the person even forgets they're carrying something. They just know they're tired. That everything takes more effort than it should. That life, for some reason, always feels heavier. Carl Jung said trauma is a psychic wound that, when ignored, keeps bleeding inside. But he also said that this wound can become a passage, not to forget what hurt, but to transform what still pulses like a threat. When pain is truly heard, it doesn't become a sentence. It becomes awareness. The problem is, almost no one teaches us how to listen to pain. The world demands performance, not listening. And so, those who've suffered too much learn to cope. They build masks, create emotional shortcuts, hide. They go on living. Sometimes, even smiling. But something inside stays on high alert, as if any touch could reopen what barely managed to heal. You might recognize yourself in many of these traits. Or you might think of someone you love who suddenly makes more sense now. Either way, what matters here isn't to analyze anyone, it's to embrace. With more empathy, with more presence, and most of all, with less guilt. Because every behavior has a story behind it. No trait shows up out of nowhere. So if at any point during this video you feel a lump in your throat or the need to take a deeper breath, don't be surprised. It's just your soul recognizing a piece of itself. And that, as simple as it may seem, is already a huge step. Some people learned early on that depending is dangerous, that asking hurts, that counting on someone can lead to humiliation or abandonment. And so, as a response, the psyche builds a solution. The person becomes everything for themselves. Strong, decisive, unbreakable, but inside, exhausted. Carl Jung spoke of the false self as a structure the ego builds to survive when being who you are becomes too risky. It's a way of functioning that does protect, but also isolates. The person gets used to carrying everything alone, and the world, without realizing it, starts believing they actually can handle it all. But no one should have to handle everything all the time. That's why the first trait of those who've suffered too much in life is the armor of hyper-independence. It's not a sign of maturity. It's an old scar. It may look impressive from afar, but inside, it's heavy as lead. The person refuses to show pain, but feels it. Refuses to ask for comfort, but needs it. They just don't know how anymore. Or they're ashamed, or don't even remember what it's like to trust without fear. This rigidity spreads into relationships, friendships, work. Everything becomes performance. Everything becomes self-control. But there's a cost. The chest gets tighter. Touch becomes a threat. Rest, a weakness. And even surrounded by people, the person feels alone inside. Because hyper-independence isn't freedom. It's a prison with an internal lock. Those who live with it don't want to be a burden. They just want to make sure they'll never be left hanging again. But deep down, it's just another way to stay silently wounded. The second trait often seen in people who've suffered too much is excessive empathy. At first glance, it seems like a virtue, and in many cases, it is. But when empathy becomes a survival mechanism, it stops being just a quality and turns into a coping strategy. Some people, even as children, learned to scan the room like they were looking for shelter. They could feel in the air when something was about to go wrong. They picked up on the tone of voice, on a glance, on silence. They developed such sharp sensitivity that, without realizing it, they started feeling for others, before they even knew how to name what they felt for themselves. This over-empathy doesn't come from a light place. It's born out of necessity, from the fear of being the target of an unstable father, from the effort to anticipate the next emotional outburst from a mother, from the burden of keeping peace at home, even if peace cost their own childhood. Jung called projection this unconscious move of placing onto others something we haven't yet dared to see in ourselves. And often, that's what happens with those who feel too much for others. They're unknowingly trying to care for in others a pain they haven't faced in themselves. The person becomes the constant support, the go-to advisor, the one who's always there. But behind all that giving lies a deep exhaustion, because those who feel for everyone all the time almost always forget about themselves. Too much empathy may seem noble, and sometimes it is, but it can also be a form of escape, a way to avoid diving into one's own pain, a way to exist for others, because existing for oneself became too heavy. Worse, this kind of empathy can lead to unbalanced relationships, ones where one gives and the other only takes, where listening to the other becomes an excuse to never hear yourself, and little by little, that sensitivity turns into overload. People who carry this trait often feel invisible when they're not being useful, and that's the clearest sign that empathy, in this case, stopped being love and became a defense mechanism. Deep down, all this emotional sensitivity has a reason. Someone back then had to anticipate emotions to survive, but now, they don't have to anymore. And maybe the greatest act of real empathy is finally turning that attentiveness inward. Some people love halfway, not because they don't feel, they feel way too much, but they hold back. They observe, they analyze every detail before opening their heart, and even when they start to trust, they always keep a part of themselves hidden away. A part no one touches, a part that always doubts. It's like something inside constantly whispers, "Careful, this could hurt again." And it really could. For someone who was broken right where they most needed safety, opening up stopped being simple. The memory of abandonment screams louder than the presence of affection. Love shows up, but fear tags along. This is the third trait of those who've suffered too much: fear of true relationships. Intimacy sets off old alarms. It's not being dramatic, it's the unconscious recognizing patterns that left deep marks. Even if the person, in the present, can't quite explain why they're reacting that way. Jung spoke about how unconscious complexes hijack our awareness. In a relationship, this shows up as overreactions, jealousy that seems irrational, sudden withdrawal. But behind it, there's almost always an inner child who still remembers exactly how much it hurt to trust, and then be left behind. On the outside, this person might seem confident, sometimes even self-sufficient. They might say things like, "I don't need anyone," or "I'm better off alone." But inside, there's a deep longing that's been buried, and every time someone gets too close, it shows up disguised as fear, irritability, control, or silence. True relationships require showing up fully, but for someone who's been through it, being fully present feels way too exposed. And then, love turns into a battlefield, not a place to rest. If you love someone like this, you'll need patience. And if you see yourself in this, you'll need courage. Not to dive in head first, but to realize that maybe, just maybe, the present doesn't have to be an automatic replay of the past. Not all love hurts. Not every approach is disguised abandonment. Sometimes it's just someone trying to stay. How many times have you heard this? "You're so strong." And every time, you smile, say thanks, nod. But no one knows that night you cried yourself to sleep, alone, again. Some people became symbols of strength because they never had another choice. When the world falls apart too early, you either hold up the roof with your own hands, or you collapse with it. And so the body learns to get up every day, even when everything inside just wants to lie down and disappear. The fourth trait of those who've suffered too much is this: the persona of a strong person who breaks down alone. The appearance is balanced, the voice is firm, the gaze steady, but behind it all is an exhaustion no one sees. Because showing tiredness feels like an unacceptable weakness. And showing pain? Not even an option. Jung called this persona, the social mask we all wear. But when the pain is too big, that mask stops being a choice and becomes a permanent shield. The person becomes what the world needs them to be, and forgets to be what they feel. The risk is that all this strength becomes a silent prison. No one asks if you need help, because everyone believes you've got it all under control. But no one can handle everything all the time. No one should. What looks like stability is often just containment. What looks like self-control is actually fear of falling apart in front of someone. And then life becomes this, holding everything together on the outside while slowly cracking on the inside. And when the breakdown comes, it comes alone. In the shower, on the pillow, on the way home. No one sees, no one suspects. Because the performance was so flawless, it doesn't even seem possible that something could be wrong. But it is. It's been too heavy for too long. Real strength isn't about never falling. It's being able to say, honestly, today is hard. And trusting that someone will listen, without judgment, advice, or pressure. Just listen. Maybe, on that day, the armor starts to loosen. The fifth trait of those who've suffered too much is sensory sensitivity. Loud sounds feel overwhelming. Bright lights irritate. Crowded places drain. The mind tries to stay in control, but the body reacts first. The heart races, breathing shortens, the urge to flee shows up without any clear reason. It's not being dramatic. It's not an exaggeration. It's that the nervous system has learned to live on high alert. Behind this hypersensitivity, there's a story, a childhood where danger arrived without warning, a trauma that turned the world into a threat, a body that, for a long time, couldn't relax. When emotional pain is deep and constant, the body doesn't forget. Jung said that whatever doesn't come to consciousness returns as fate. In the case of old pain, it comes back as physical sensations. The body speaks what the soul hasn't yet found words for. This sensitivity makes someone notice what others miss. A background sound that feels aggressive. A smell no one else picked up on. A glance that lasts half a second too long and feels like judgment. It's like living with all the sensors always on, even when there's no real danger. It's exhausting, and often confusing, because the people around don't understand why that place felt off, why that party was too much, why that conversation left someone drained. But for the one who feels it, everything is stimulus. Everything hits at full volume. This sensitivity can be a gift when well understood. Many people with this trait are intuitive, perceptive, deeply aware. But when it's rooted in trauma, it becomes a burden. The body becomes a silent battlefield, reacting to threats the conscious mind has already forgotten, but the soul still holds. Healing begins when we acknowledge how pain impacts the body, when we understand that discomfort isn't weakness, it's memory, and that an exaggerated reaction to stimuli might just be an old scream asking to be heard. Not every discomfort is random. Sometimes, it's just the body saying, "It was too much for me once, and I'm just trying to protect you." The sixth trait of those who've suffered too much is the obsessive need for control. And it's not because the person is bossy, rigid, or controlling in the usual sense. It's because, at some point in life, chaos was overwhelming, and they learned that if they don't control everything, everything falls apart. Control becomes a way to breathe, planning every step, anticipating every outcome, triple-checking everything. It's not about power. It's about fear. Fear of being caught off guard again. Fear of reliving something that already cost too much. On the outside, it looks like efficiency, organization, responsibility. But inside, it's constant tension. There's no rest. Because even when everything is fine, the mind is still racing. What if something goes wrong? What if I'm forgetting something? What if... Carl Jung said the ego tries to control exactly what the unconscious doesn't want to face. And in this case, control becomes a barricade against life's unpredictability, against the feeling of helplessness that once took over and never fully left. People stuck in this control mode struggle to relax. They hate delegating. They fight to accept the unexpected. Because to them, surprises aren't just inconvenient. They're emotional threats. They disrupt more than routines. They shake the psyche. Often, they don't even realize how trapped they are in this mechanism. They just feel constantly tired, always overloaded, always fixing everything, always fixing even when no one asked. And this comes at a cost. Relationships become tense, small decisions feel huge. The present is never enough because the mind is always 2 steps ahead, trying to predict. At the core, this obsession with control isn't a sign of strength. It's the mark of a soul that once felt completely powerless against pain, and is now trying to make up for it. But life, that wild, mysterious force, cannot be controlled. It can only be lived. And living requires trust. Not blind trust, but a small, possible openness. The trust that maybe, just maybe, not everything needs to be controlled to work out. Healing doesn't come from dropping control all at once. It comes from realizing, little by little, that it's possible to exist without being afraid everything will collapse. Letting go of control is like turning off the lights in a room where you used to sleep with everything on because you were scared of the dark. At first, it's unsettling. Then, it might become rest. But rest doesn't always come with noise, people, or conversation. Sometimes, real relief arrives when everything quiets down, when the outside world stops demanding, pressing, touching. That's the seventh trait of those who've suffered too much. Silence as a refuge. It's not isolation out of disdain. It's a need for space, for pause, for time to hear your own breath without being invaded by expectations. Silence becomes shelter, a safe place, a kind of cocoon where the soul tries to reorganize itself, and that can be hard to understand for those who live outward. Those who need noise, movement, and constant company might find it strange when someone prefers a quiet corner, a shorter chat, a lighter presence. But for those who've weathered internal storms, silence isn't emptiness, it's repair. Jung recognized the symbolic value of retreat. He saw withdrawal as a psychic process of death and rebirth. When everything feels like too much, the soul pulls back, like someone shielding a wound from touch. Not out of coldness, but for survival. And silence isn't just the absence of sound, it's the absence of judgment, of demands, of masks. It's a space where nothing needs to be explained, where pain can simply exist, without an audience, without pressure to heal fast. But over time, that silence which started as healing can become a wall. What was once a pause becomes a pattern, and the risk is that silence starts to mean solitude. And solitude, forgetfulness. That's why this trait requires care. Not everyone who goes quiet is okay. Sometimes, they're just too tired to keep trying to fit into a world that never stops talking. The path is allowing that silence, without guilt, without needing to explain, but also knowing when to crack the door open, to let someone in, someone who will listen, who will stay. Because silence can be home, but it also needs a door. Now, have you ever realized how saying "I trust you" can seem simple? But for someone who was hurt while trusting, those words feel heavy? The gesture gets stuck in the throat. The emotion locks up the entire body. Not because the feeling isn't there, but because the risk feels too big. The eighth trait of those who've suffered too much is a heart that's overly guarded. Locked, actually. Protected with everything it's got, and not out of malice, pride, or indifference. But because the last time it was open, it hurt. And it hurt deeply. The ego learns to protect itself. It builds invisible filters. It evaluates everything before it believes. It doubts before it surrenders. It analyzes gestures, tone of voice, even the delay between one message and the next. Love arrives, but it goes through a brutal screening before being accepted, and it's exhausting, for the one who feels, and for the one trying to love them. Because affection never flows easily. There's always hidden weight, tension. Can I really trust this? The soul lives like someone sleeping with one eye open. Jung spoke of the difference between living from fear and living from trust. And here, fear became the lens. The person sees everything through the memory of pain. And even when everything is fine, something inside says, "Be ready. This could change." It's as if the unconscious doesn't know time has passed. It still reacts as if the threat were there, even when it's not. Even when, this time, the other person is kind, present, gentle. Distrust becomes a way to avoid pain, but it ends up blocking the real experience of love. Because there's no deep connection without some form of surrender, without risk, without opening the door for someone to come in. And the most ironic part? The ones who guard their hearts the most are usually the ones who long to love and be loved the deepest. They just don't want to feel it all over again. They just want to protect themselves. But overprotecting also hurts. The key might be in testing, slowly, trusting a little, seeing what happens, taking a step, not opening everything, but also not running away. Because maybe, just maybe, this time love didn't come to hurt. It came to stay. The ninth trait of those who've suffered too much. A sense of justice sharpened by pain. It doesn't come from books or grand speeches. It comes from first-hand experience with injustice, with betrayal, with being silenced, with the helplessness of being deeply hurt, and no one stepping in to protect you. A soul that's been crushed by injustice learns to smell it from far away, and won't tolerate it anymore. The slightest spark of disrespect sets off an old alarm. And even when everything seems fine, the reaction comes. Strong. as defense, but also as memory. Jung understood that emotional complexes activate when the present touches the same wound the past created, and this sense of justice is one of those wounds. A trait of someone who carries the scar of being silenced, and now refuses to stay quiet. Sometimes, people around someone like this don't get it. They think it's overreacting, being dramatic, impulsive, but it's not. It's the psyche saying, "Not this time. This time I won't swallow it." This ethical sensitivity often shows up early. Kids who saw wrong things and couldn't do anything. Teenagers who rebelled against absurd rules. Adults who defend causes with the intensity of someone trying to save their inner child. The archetype activated here is the moral warrior, the one who fights for coherence, for respect, for integrity, not for perfection, but for dignity. And this fight, when balanced, is noble. But when guided only by pain, it can turn into rigidity, or intolerance. The challenge then is this: to keep that sense of justice without letting it become armor against the world. To use the sword, but also know when to lower it, when to listen, when to embrace. Because those who've been hurt by injustice know exactly how it wounds. And for that very reason, they have the rare chance to do things differently, to be the kind of presence that protects, without punishing, that fights, without getting lost in the war. Those who carry the sword of justice know something many don't. Pain sharpens perception. And not just to spot injustice, but also to notice what no one else sees. Because those who've suffered too much develop a radar for other people's pain, even when it's disguised as silence. There are looks that cut through, not because of what they say, but because of what they quietly perceive. People who know when someone's not okay, even when they smile. Who feel what hasn't been said, who understand what no one ever shared, and who hold space, without asking too many questions. That's the 10th trait of those who've suffered too much, the ability to see the invisible in others. It's as if pain tuned their senses. The soul becomes more alert, more empathetic, more open to sensing where the sadness hides, even when it's masked. And this isn't magic, it's memory. Memory of having lived in the very skin what now can only be detected in tiny signs. This kind of perception isn't taught. It's born, or better yet, it's awakened after a fall. Those who've cried quietly know how to listen to silence. Those who've felt alone in a crowd learn to recognize when someone else is in that same place. It's almost instinctive. Jung said that as we integrate our own pain, we become more able to recognize collective pain. That's exactly what this trait is. A kind of emotional radar that doesn't seek to be noticed, but shows up when needed. And often, it makes all the difference. This sensitivity may seem gentle, but it carries weight. Because seeing what no one else sees is also a responsibility. And those who feel too much for others often forget about themselves. They absorb, they care, they get involved, and they disappear. The key is balance. To see others without losing yourself. To be present without dissolving. To feel with someone, but not carry everything alone. This ability to perceive the invisible is a gift, but it's also a reminder. Pain, when processed with awareness, becomes a tool, a presence, a touch that doesn't invade, but supports. And even when the world keeps rushing, those with this trait know the truth is in the details, in how someone sits, in the pause between words, in a "I'm fine" that doesn't quite convince. And only someone who's felt real pain knows what that truly means. But seeing others so clearly comes at a cost. While you're reading people's eyes, gestures, tones of voice, something inside whispers, what if, in the end, you're just a burden? Have you ever caught yourself apologizing for something small, or for nothing at all? Have you ever felt that just by being there, taking up space, you were already too much? The 11th trait of those who've suffered too much is this: the deep fear of being a burden. It's a quiet feeling, but constant. A kind of silent shame for existing with all your needs, hurts, desires. Those who carry this fear almost never talk about it, but it shows in every attempt to shrink to fit, in every "I'm okay" said just to not worry anyone, in every time they swallow their tears so no one thinks they're weak. This trait usually starts early, when emotional pain was ignored or turned into a problem for others. Kids who heard "stop crying," "don't be dramatic," or were simply treated like they didn't matter grow up believing that feeling is a burden, and that they themselves are an inconvenience. The adult who comes out of that is kind, helpful, responsible, but constantly afraid of being too much. They feel guilty for asking for help. They feel bad for taking up space during moments of weakness. They live trying to make up for the simple fact that they exist. Jung called this unconscious guilt, something born from a wound so deep that the ego shapes itself around it. And in this case, the wound says, you only have value if you don't get in the way. The person learns to justify themselves constantly, to soften their own pain, to minimize every need. Sometimes, even the love they receive becomes uncomfortable, as if they're taking the place of someone more deserving. But living like this is like walking afraid to leave footprints, existing as if you need permission just to breathe. The truth is, no one should feel guilty for needing. Needing is human. Being tired is human. And being vulnerable is too. Recognizing that fear is already part of the healing. Because when you understand that taking up space isn't an offense, it's a right. Something shifts. The weight gets lighter. The soul stands a bit taller. And life stops being a constant effort to not bother anyone. You don't have to earn affection. You don't have to explain yourself so much. Being here is already enough. And even with all that fear of being a burden, your soul still finds refuge. In the unnoticed details. In the warmth of a hot coffee in your hands. In a good morning no one else gave. Because those who've lost a lot learn to treasure the smallest things. And that's where healing begins to smile. A warm cup in your hands. The late afternoon light coming through the window. That simple, "Did you get home safe?" message. The sound of rain while the world outside keeps spinning. The 12th trait of those who've suffered too much is the ability to appreciate the little things. It's not romanticizing pain. It's what pain leaves behind. When you go through times where everything feels like it's falling apart. When chaos takes over, the simple things take on new meaning. The small no longer feels small. It becomes a sign of life, of peace, of presence. Those who've been shattered learn to recognize beauty where others just pass by. The soul develops a kind of quiet gratitude, not for the pain itself, but for what came after, for the pause, for unexpected affection, for the stability that once felt impossible. Jung spoke of the archetype of the wise one, someone who, after facing the shadow, returns with a new way of seeing the world, more humble, more attentive, more present. That's what happens here. The person doesn't need much to feel, and when they do feel, they feel it fully. This sensitivity shows up in the little things. It's the person who smiles when they see the sky change color, who truly thanks you for coffee made at just the right moment, who cries at a song because it reached a place they didn't know still hurt. And sometimes this is mistaken for fragility, but it's the opposite. It's depth, it's emotional maturity, it's having survived chaos and still holding on to tenderness. The ability to appreciate the little things is a trait of someone who knows what it's like to lose everything, and now sees the value in things before they're gone. It's a fuller presence, a silence that knows how to listen, a look that gives thanks even before asking. And the final trait of those who've suffered too much is the need for purpose after the pain. Surviving isn't enough. The soul wants to understand why. It wants to turn pain into direction, to make sense of what once felt like pure devastation. It's common that after going through something really hard, a person begins searching for something bigger than themselves. A reason to keep going, a way to ensure it wasn't all in vain. And that reason is rarely grand, but it's deeply true. It might be helping someone else who's going through the same thing. It might be creating something new, writing, caring, teaching, healing. It might simply be being there for someone the way no one was for them. But there has to be a why. Pain wants to become path. Jung saw this as the beginning of individuation, when someone stops being a prisoner of their own story and begins turning it into awareness, into purpose, into offering. This trait shows in how the person begins to show up in the world. Less concerned with appearance, more connected to truth. They know life is short, and that staying here comes at a cost. So they make it count. They give meaning even to what once felt unbearable. And no, that doesn't mean the pain is gone. It's still there, as memory, as scar, but it no longer dominates. Now it points, it shows the way. Those who feel this start to look back and realize that, even broken, they kept going. That even wounded, they still cared. That even not knowing exactly how, they turned suffering into presence, and presence into purpose. And it's not about being a role model or appearing strong. It's about little by little, no longer just surviving, but beginning to live with intention. This need for purpose isn't escape, it's growth. It's the birth of something new in the soul. Something that says, I went through it. But that's not all I am. And from that place, life begins to bloom in a whole new way. You are not your pain, but you don't need to hide it either. There's a strange strength in the way we survive. A kind of raw wisdom forged in the background of the soul, without applause, without witnesses. Every trait we've talked about is a reflection of that, of what you did to stay on your feet, of how you found a way to keep going, even when every part of you wanted to stop. Some of these traits became shields, others compasses. Some turned into weight, others into gifts. But all of them, without exception, were born as an attempt to protect something precious in you. Carl Jung said, "The tree that reaches to heaven must have roots that reach down to hell." And that's exactly it. Everything you've blossomed into has everything to do with what you've endured. You're not wrong for having these marks. You're alive. And being alive after all you've been through is already a strength the world rarely sees, but one that exists, and pulses, and deserves recognition. This isn't about saying everything is healed. Not that everything will magically fall into place now, but maybe, for the first time, you can look with a little more kindness at those parts of yourself you've learned to hate, because they were trying to protect you too. You don't need to hide anything anymore, or stay on guard all the time. The pain that shaped you doesn't have to lead the way any longer. It can, now, walk beside you, in silence, as you keep going, with more awareness, with more freedom, and with the understanding that what once felt like weakness was just a way to not give up. You kept going, and that says a lot. If this video spoke to you in any way, if you saw yourself in any of these traits or thought of someone who carries these marks, subscribe to the channel. Here, we keep exploring these deep paths of the psyche, pain, and healing, always with respect, simplicity, and truth. And if you made it here, to the very end, drop this simple but meaningful phrase in the comments. "My pain taught me too." That way, I'll know you stayed with me until the end, and maybe someone else will see that phrase and feel a little less alone. See you in the next video, and take care. You deserve it.